Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
So, in this particular lecture, I would be focusing on like this particular question of how sustainable these contemporary urban models are, or the contemporary so called sustainable cities are. So, we would plunge into a critical analysis of contemporary urban models in this particular presentation, lecture 10. Before plunging into the critical analysis of urban discourses and models, so how sustainable these models are, I think it will be also important for us to discuss a bit on sustainable urbanization, which is the post 2015 development agenda of the United Nations. So, it is it puts a lot of emphasis on the urban, on city, but it will be also important for us to critically understand the significance of sustainable urbanization. So, like I think there is a gap between this theoretical rhetoric and actual reality, and we would get a lot of scope or opportunity to discuss this even within the context of India. So, when we will be discussing on contemporary Indian plans and missions, like for example sustainable cities or sustainable city mission, smart city mission. So, when we will be discussing Indian smart city mission, we will also be contextualizing these grand ideas and plans within this larger visions of the global organizations like United Nations. This sustainable urbanization, most importantly, because Indian missions and ideas are also to great extent they are in tune to the gospel of sustainable urbanization. So, we would enter into a critical engagement of these ideas, etc. But here I would slightly touch upon sustainable urbanization and mainly focus on the various challenges or limitations or criticisms relating to this the urban environmental discourses and models which we had discussed in the previous lecture. So, sustainable urbanization, this is the post 2050 development agenda of the UN, and it reports came out from the ECOSOC in 2014, and for the first time in 2014 we came across this terminology, sustainable urbanization, integrating economic, social and environmental dimensions of sustainable development. And all of us can understand that why 2014, because 2014 actually set the context for this particular discussion, because it was understood by then that urbanization is irreversible, and like the urbanization or hyper urbanization or urbanizing trend would go on, which is best I think explained in terms of planetary urbanization. So, when planetary urbanization it became a vivid reality, and almost there were no ways or viable pathways to step back. So, I think again this sustainable urbanization again very much derived from the concept of sustainable development. This was floated by the ECOSOC. So, what is the key idea, or what are the key ideas in this particular gospel? So, the key ideas are that there is an overarching emphasis on cities. So, cities are considered as access for the new global change, economic forces for entire nations, central players on the world stage, the locus of change, and the venue where human agency is mobilized. So, whole lot of optimism on cities. And this is a quote from UN Habitat. So, UN Habitat report 2012, which can also be considered as a precursor for this UN ECOSOC 2014 report. So, here in this 2012 report, like this optimism surrounding cities is vividly reflected. So, cities around the world are playing an ever increasing role in creating wealth, enhancing social development, attracting investment, and harnessing both human and technical resources for achieving unprecedented gains in productivity and competitiveness. So, it was absolutely believed that cities are very, very efficient. So, cities are the locus of change, locus of productivity, locus of creativity, locus of efficiency, etc. But very unfortunately, lot of key or crucial, concepts or understandings are actually missing, from this particular tenet or gospel of sustainable urbanization. So, for example, most importantly, this the key ideas like sustainable flows between cities and their wider ecological infrastructures. Urban metabolism, the concept of urban metabolism, which is so very important for the survival of the urban itself. These are all missing in this particular gospel, which which aggressively puts lot of emphasis, overarching emphasis on the urban or cities. And if you go through the report, 2014 UN ECOSOC report, you will understand that it doesn't even pay heed to this fundamental or basic fact that by their own definitions, cities are actually not self-sufficient. So, so these are some of the criticisms, and I think we need to have a critical outlook when we kind of analyze or interpret this report, and when we try to understand what sustainable urbanization is all about. And as I mentioned, that I will be discussing or shedding light on this particular aspect in detail when we would also be focusing on contemporary urbanization or urban environmental trajectories within the Indian subcontinent. So, with this I move on to the main part or the major part of lecture 10, where I would be also discussing the limitations or challenges that are embedded in the contemporary urban environmental models and designs like high density cities, zero carbon cities, etc. So, to begin with high density cities, so we all of us know by now, because this was covered in lecture 9, that how Glaser actually he promoted urban density or urban core like anything. So, he also reflected a lot on poverty. So, if you go through this book, you will find his reflections on poverty. So, and he says that poverty is not necessarily bad for cities, and he also says that cities are not responsible for impoverishment or poverty, because like people who are already poor and who stay in rural areas, they actually they migrate to the urban areas in search of prosperity, in search of mobility, upward mobility, and also like in search of opportunities, etc. So, and cities, in cities some of them can actually make their future. And in an anecdotal note, in an anecdotal approach, Glaser also he talks about some of the families which could make their fortunes being industrial era urbanites, like for example the Kennedys in Boston, Richard Wright, and also people like Lila Vase in Rio, etc. So, he gives these examples, and he shows that how cities actually provides conditions for rags to riches. But unfortunately, he disapproves or there is a disapproval of perpetual urban poverty, which is like reflected in the spaces where the immigrants actually inhabit, and also the segregated African American ghettos. So, there is disapproval of perpetual urban poverty in the Glazerian paradigm. And Glaser also he does not talk much, or he at all does not talk about how impoverished citizens in these high density cities can actually, during the contemporary now, can actually get out of poverty. So, these questions, very important questions on poverty, post industrial poverty, remains unaddressed. Also, he fails to make a very good distinction between the industrial industrial economic sector and the post industrial economic sector. So, the political economic mode of production lens or framework is very much missing in the otherwise so called very tech induced, tech oriented understanding of Ed Glaser. So, final question, like for example which also remains unaddressed in the Glazerian paradigm is, would today's service, information and knowledge based economy be accommodative to the marginalized classes. So to the cities, you know, they provide services, they no more provide goods. So services are more important, which are provided by cities. So services in the form of information technology, communication, knowledge based economy, etc. So these cities providing services and not goods, would this be accommodative to the marginalized, impoverished, vulnerable classes? So this question also remains quite unaddressed in this book by Glaser. And I mentioned Okejo in my last presentation as well. So Okejo, when he also did an analysis of you know, Glaser's approach, or Glaserian high density cities, he says that yes, Glaser has considered health, happiness, green, productivity, sprawl as important variables, but how people actually live in. So this everydayness, everyday life realities, everyday coping mechanisms, you know, flurry of bottom up needs driven activities which are pursued by you know, by the local urban residents, sometimes, you know, where there is an absence of policy driven facilities or infrastructures. So how people who live in and understand their urban environments, and how such perspective fit within his framework for change. So there is no scope, you know, for incorporating this everydayness in his otherwise very elaborate and technology induced sophisticated density paradigm. So apart from this, there are also other challenges. So for example, the vicissitudes associated with teleocratic planning, top down, very top down, and which also, you know, to an extent which leads to spatial determinism. It's because like more emphasis is on the form than the content. So, and of course, when there is more emphasis on form than content, then the danger of spatial determinism is always there, and lack of diversity. So there is promotion for density, but no promotion for diversity, and no understanding that why and how diversity is so important and should be nurtured and harnessed in order to, you know, in order to inject livability and, you know, energy in these livable urban spaces. So lack of diversity in this regimented process projects. So this was also like long back. This is not typically the typically a challenge or a limitation from limitation of the high density city design, specifically specifically being discussed by Glaser. But long back, you know, Jane Jacobs also criticized, you know, criticized this lack of diversity in regimented process. So the same problem or the same mistake we also find in the Edwardian, Glaserian high density paradigm. And Moroni is a very recent, Moroni in his recent work, he has talked about the very fact that why you know, we should invest more or understand more. I mean, why should we provide or give more significance to diversity than density? Or like, you know, even if we are more innovative, we can think about diversity non-compromised density. So it's very important to take care of these nuances, right? So Moroni says that density itself is not an asset on its own. So density is something to be encouraged and nurtured, not directly determined by planning. So again, it should not be top down, it has to be bottom up, and or, you know, at best it can also be a kind of, it can be crafted through a continuous interplay or dialogue you know, between these top down and bottom up processes. So like the very vitality and prosperity of city depends on diversity, right? Local knowledge remains so very important because each urban space has its own narrative. So the knowledge has to be dispersed, knowledge has to be very, very contextual, because we are talking about the contemporary complex urban systems. So we are talking about complex urban systems of our contemporary times. So dispersed and contextual knowledge seems to be or remains very, very important, and that is why there is a need to transcend from teleocratic to nomocratic planning. So, nomocratic planning where where planning is more bottom up, and also this transition from directional to relational approach has to be crafted. Relational approach which is very flexible, which promotes flexible socio-spatial planning. It remains simple, it's stable, it's flexible, it's impersonal, and there is a whole lot of scope to kind of accommodate diversified and countless sometimes like incomparable experiences. So, density has to be a tool, and it cannot be an end. So, I think these are a couple of important points which also make us understand that when we are talking about urban spaces, it's not about, it's not a technical story, but socio-cultural dimensions, psychological dimensions need to be taken care of. Of course, apart from the very important political, economic variables that finally gives shape to a particular city and help us understand whether the city is just, democratic, equal, and hence sustainable and resilient. Yeah, compact cities. So, if you remember, I mentioned in my last class that there is an ambiguity in this design of compactness itself, and here this ambiguity, just see the last portion of this slide. So, compact city tries to address a dual goal. So, urban sustainability derived from a compact pattern on one hand, and then livability derived from lower density areas offering greenery and clean environment on the other hand, and these two seems to be a little clashing seems to be clashing. And like there are some works which talk about the limitations of this particular model, this model of compact cities, and for example, Oakte says that it is too centralized, does not consider the shortages of livable environments within the city, and indeed the majority of people residing in compact areas look forward to leaving the high density zones to live in lower density zones with a clean, pure and quiet environment. So, the essence of compactness actually gets compromised. And again, like if you are talking about if you are talking about dense core, if you are talking about compactness, then like there can be a lot of noise due to motorized traffic congestion, and if you have more noise and more pollution and more congestion, then of course it becomes an antithesis of the concept of green city. So, these are some of the ambiguities within that are embedded in the compact city design. Eco-city, eco-city, cost of providing infrastructure is prohibitive because it is absolutely ICT enabled. So, one can understand that why cost of providing this very sophisticated infrastructures is really prohibited. So, and hence like this is related to hindrance to social equity. So, why and how social equity is hindered? Because it is only affordable to some specific groups or specific communities, and housing is actually not affordable for all social classes, and sometimes also it remains it is only targeted to the affluent sections of the society. Profits are also reaped by investors who of course is the which of course is the private sector in this case and not the public sector, and neither citizens can reap the benefits nor the private sector, but it is absolutely private driven and private fed, and where the profits can only be made by the private high tech corporate capitalist companies. Unemployment, so because human workers are replaced with ICT technologies. So, which is true for any kind of so called quote unquote like AI enabled, ICT enabled smart technologies, and telecommunication also, which is another key feature of ecocity, cannot be a substitute for interaction in the city. So, Gasper and Glaser again they have written on this particular feature or characteristic of ecocity, where they argue that yes, this can be this video conferencing or telecommunication, it can be considered as green communication because the ecological footprint is less, but at the same time the absence of physical touch and face to face communication, it has some impact on the social and and the psychological well-being of citizens. So, ubiquitous eco-cities cannot support sustainability, because if these are the criticisms, then how can you say that this ubiquitous so-called eco-city is actually eco-friendly or sustainable. So, eco-cities cannot support sustainability, notwithstanding all the advances in communication technology. So, this is a major criticism of eco-city. Yes, coming to problems or challenges associated with zero carbon eco-city, it is high cost. Again, like eco-cities, zero carbon eco-city is also, I mean, it's very costly, because it's a kind of a laudable project. It's a highly private investment laden. And also there is a very interesting article by Premlata et al. 2013, where the authors argue that waste free city itself, this particular concept of waste free city, contradicts the second law of thermodynamics. So, what is this second law of thermodynamics? So, according to the second law of thermodynamics, any organism or any place can never be 100% efficient. So, it means that a system, whether it is engaged in production or pollution control, etc., any other activities, it will generate some sort of waste. It cannot be absolutely waste free or emission free. So, I mean it absolutely kind of negates or contradicts the second law of thermodynamics. So, it is not possible. So, the question of I mean the criteria, or I mean not criteria, but this impossibility dimension is very much there. It is enmeshed in this particular idea or concept of so-called, it sounds fascinating, but in terms of its feasibility, in terms of its practical application, I mean I think it is a limited option. And also again it is very exclusive to those countries that have significant wealth, such as UAE. And when we discuss political ecology, when we discuss urban social science frameworks and approaches, that why it is important to understand urban environmental issues through the various social sciences, very cutting edge, radical, breakthrough social science paradigms, approaches, frameworks, etc., like political ecology, we will see that how this urban how this like UAE cities, I mean on paper they are described as, or they are described as zero carbon, they are described as ubiquitous eco-cities, etc. But how unequal they are, we will be aware, or we will get exposed to this inequity when we apply political ecology lens or political ecology approach to understand the functioning of these unjust cities. So, and we will take this up for sure. So, yes, finally wrapping up this discussion with the limitations that are embedded in zero carbon eco-city, they are definitely targeted to specific citizens like highly educated masses, high tech corporations, affluent sections, and they are totally geared towards ensuring their safety and comforts. So, finally, unaffordable, unequal, unjust. So, if unaffordable, unequal, unjust, then how can they be sustainable and resilient at all? So, they are unsustainable and non-resilient for sure. So, this particular table again I have taken from Hassan and Lee. So, in the last presentation I also talked to you, I also asked you to go through or access the article by Hassan and Lee, because it's very it provides comprehensive coverage on this urban environmental designs and models. And this table is, it's very useful because it captures a snapshot on the initiative, advantages, disadvantages, and conflicts with sustainability pillars. So, you remember like we discussed this 4 pillars and how sustainable cities, the concept of sustainable cities, actually it is very much dependent or on the integration of these 4 pillars. So, here if you see take a look into the table, you will understand the compliance of these models or these designs with the pillars of sustainability. and you can understand, and I mean you can exactly spot the limitations within these models. So, I do not think I am going to read out this table, because it is self-explanatory, and we had discussed a lot about the challenges of these urban models already. So, I think just take a look into this, and if you have any question, any doubt, do not hesitate to ask those questions, and raise those queries in the discussion forum. So, these are some of the references, and definitely go through Hassan and Lee. And yes, so in this lecture I think we covered we discussed a lot about sustainability, the key concept, and we discussed sustainable cities, and why sustainability, sustainable cities and sustainable urbanization need to be critically looked into, explored and analyzed across specific historical, cultural and spatial contexts. We have not discussed it in very detail, but we have just touched base on this, and I told you that I will be covering this in more details in the subsequent presentations or lectures. But apart from this, but one major thing which I think we mentioned in this particular presentation is that in this gospel of sustainable urbanization, there is an overarching emphasis on the benefits of cities, and there is not much discussion or explorations around cities interrelationship with its larger ecological settings and environmental infrastructures. So, yes, and finally, in this presentation we talked about the limitations that are embedded in the urban environmental discourses, designs and models, and so there are physical, technical and social challenges, disparities imbricated within contemporary urban discourses, designs and models. So, I think with this presentation we now have grasp and grip on some of these very crucial limitations of these projects, and the limitations especially so far as the context of application is concerned. So, please go through the references, and if you have any questions, do not hesitate to raise those questions in the discussion forum. Thank you.